But we're going to go ahead and start. Thank you for those of you who are on time for the new 5:30 start, which is a little easier on our East Coast friends. Welcome to the beginning of year 4 in our Bartimaeus webinar series. We've been doing this for a while, and we're delighted to kick off this year's series with a conversation with two very dear, talented, creative, thoughtful, energetic artist friends, Tevyn East and Jay Beck. Don't get them confused here on the slide. Tevyn is the one on the left, Jay is the one on the right, but on your screen, Jay is the one on the left and Tevyn is the one on the right. See if you can try to keep that straight, or not. Doesn't really matter in the carnival world.
Right.
They are going to mostly be talking tonight about their newest collaboration, the Carnival de Resistance. But we're also going to talk a little bit with them about their lives, their journey, their vocation, and their thoughts. So Jay and Tevyn, welcome to the webinar. We're really, really great to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm going to switch over here so folks can really see your beautiful faces here a little better. Let's begin with a little bit of biography so folks can have some context about each of you, and we're going to do that separately since you've had a long personal and faith and artistic journey individually before you came together in this collaboration. Let's begin, Tevyn, with you. How did you get into the arts, and how did the faith you grew up with hinder or help your early journey as an artist?
Mm-hmm. Great. I am grateful for the Word and World ideas of biography as theology, and I have been taking that seriously and thinking about my story lately. My story is one that comes into a place where the faith and the art and the activism is intertwined, but it has been sort of a zigzag journey up to this point, and a journey where I spent some time being disenchanted with each of those realms, and seeing some lack in and focusing exclusively within each of those realms. So I'm a preacher's kid. I grew up in North Carolina, the daughter of two progressive Presbyterian pastors, and while I have been exposed to some faithful witness throughout my life, been exposed to the social gospel throughout my life, I also was exposed to a lot of the divisive fights within the institution of the church, and felt some growing discontent with the Christian culture that I was exposed to. I think that discontent had some to do with not understanding how some of my inherent gifts, having to do with being an artist, being a movement artist, being a dancer. It's been also has been all my life. I've been a dancer. Being thoughtful, but also excitable and impulsive, and that somehow that didn't feel reconcilable irreconcilable with the piety and the dogmatic faith that I was exposed to. So I decided to take a break from the church, from the capital C church, and that was a time in which I funneled my energy more so into the art making and spent a good deal of time studying to be a technician, and had to go through a process after graduating with a degree in dance, had to go through a process of relearning what art meant to me. And actually, the earth was a big part of my healing process, and letting restrictive ideas about the artist vocation sort of slough away. Literally felt like the river washed away some of the restrictive ideas about an art success, and I was able to refocus on community-based artwork, to focus on collaboration, which has been a profound experience in my lifetime, very important focus for me. Also looking at the medicinal aspects of art. But there came a time where I was collaborating with local artists. I was at this time living in Virginia, in Charlottesville, Virginia, working with a group called the Zen Monkey Project, and was able to do a lot of ambitious creative projects. And actually there were some carnival projects that happened in the early 2000s that I was a part of making happen. And the momentum that had sort of carried me into more and more ambitious creative work at this time was rubbing up against my some of my discontent and what I would call my eschatological itch. I wasn't sure if this creative work was serving my deep desire to impact the world for the good and to confront systems of oppression and be a voice for something compelling and life-giving and different. So I put down the art making. I also wasn't sure, maybe I was a little too indulgent, that art making could be too self-focused and indulgent. And fortunately, I did at this time meet Ched at a Word and World school, and was sort of downplaying my work as an artist. And Ched gave me a nudge and said, we all need art, and the resistance community needs art. But I was burned out, and I decided I needed to put down the art making, the teaching for a while. And that's when I went to be an activist and to live in community and refocus on the discipleship, path. And I fortunately got to be with some remarkable people, went to Church of the Savior, was part of a program with them, and was placed as an intern in the Mary Knoll Office for Global Concerns. So I was doing advocacy work as well as showing up to a lot of political rallies and working out what it meant to be in community and to learn about resistance from this awesome community, the Church of the Savior in DC. In this time, I had a lot of deep longing that was met in profound ways It was important to be with a group of people that believe in call and understood that our individual gifts meet the needs of the world in very unique ways. So they were prepared to support me when I announced that it was time for me to pick up my work as an artist. And the Maryknoll Office for Global Concerns is doing incredible work of looking at the paradigm shift in thinking that needs to happen in order for us to move away from economic systems of exploitation and addiction into right relationship. And it's work that they've been doing for decades. So I landed in a place where I was a part of receiving this amazing critique, and these threads were coming together, and so it was profound to be exposed to that. But I started questioning how advocacy was going to change the hearts and minds of people and compel us towards a paradigm shift.
And Tevyn, this was particularly had to do with climate change issues in part, yeah, and ecological issues in general.
Yes, they have a group called the Faith, Economy, Ecology, Transformation Working Group, and so they're looking at climate change and other ecological crises that are symptoms of our growth-oriented economic system, symptoms of our capitalist corporate structure, and looking at the faith principles that confront those systems and lead us or remind us of another way that is a biblically based program for transformation. Not even a program, that's the wrong word to use. So I had this incredible critique, but I did not know if the advocacy world was changing hearts and minds, building political will of the mainstream culture. And I believed that art could be that thing that transforms. So thinking about art as like a Trojan horse, as something that comes in to a community because it's attractive and has this entertainment value, but it actually, within it are the seeds of transformation, resurrection. So Leaps and Bounds was formed. Leaps and Bounds was my one-woman show, delivering this critique and also in animating Sabbath economics. Ched worked with me on this. I worked with a number of other artists as well, and toured the country for multiple years. Did it more than 150 times in some very humble, small settings, and in some prestigious settings, primarily in churches and colleges and universities. There were multiple times that I was able to work with local organizations, activists, who would come in on the heels of the show and share about what was happening locally that people could engage in. So we were looking at how this show could be a mobilizing tool. And I do want to say that Leaps and Bounds, I did this not because my dream was to have a one-woman show, but because it seemed tactically the best choice. It was easy to take around by myself, but collaboration has always been my greatest love. And through the course of the show, I realized I was meeting lots of people, and the show was acting as a magnet to introduce me to others who shared the critique, who shared my theology, and who also understood how art can be a force for transformation.
So
And then I met Jay.
yeah, that brings us almost to the present. Jay, I want to invite you to give a similar thumbnail sketch of your journey. But before you do, I want to just acknowledge several people who have come on to the webinar. First and foremost, I want to give a very warm shout out to my mother and her caregiver, Alni Bautista. Mom is convalescing at a nursing care unit after a very serious illness. She's almost 93 and still kicking, and we organized a laptop to come into the nursing unit. Thank you, Alni, for doing that, and we're glad, Mom, that you're joining us. My mom is a world-class artist, and so she's particularly interested in this conversation. I also want to give a shout out to Jeremy Porter coming in from Kentucky. Our good friends at the Wilderness Way community in Portland are back with us. And Warren Cooper is tuning in, I think, for the first time. Warren, also a world-class musician there in Philadelphia, who's going to join us at the Institute. I think Alan Jenkins from Atlanta is with us for the first time. So all of you, Lyndon Harris, thank you for joining us. We're really just getting underway. Jay, what's your story, man?
Well, grew up in the swamps. I was raised by wolves.
Not too far from the truth.
Yeah. I grown up Catholic and in Buffalo, New York, and had a lot of tension with that growing up, loving the symbolism and the mythology and the liturgical drama of the ritual and the ceremony. Something about the Mass and my upbringing always drew me deeper into mystery and awe for the divine, and I love that aspect of it. But at the same time, the congregation that I was a part of was not very intentional. A lot of going because you're supposed to go, and not deeper questions going or much discipleship happening, at least from my experience with it. So found that as I grew up, found that in my teen years in the music community. I am a percussionist by calling and by discipline, predominantly studying West African, Afro-Brazilian, Afro-Cuban, Afro-Haitian, all the Afro-diasporic drumming traditions is my primary discipline, and time I've spent studied dabbling in other traditions, but mostly those. And finding that community resonating with the whole that I was looking for inside of my Catholic community, with questions and with answering it about village togetherness, about explaining sacred symbols, about what music was for, and the role of justice being connected to the sound of the people and the sound of the community coming together, both for all those liturgical elements that I resonated with but didn't see applied in the lives of the faith family that I had at the time. And then, so finding it there and finding it in the anarchist scene, beginning as a teenager, just being drawn to that because in the crossover between the music scenes and justice scenes, they were the ones that seemed to be trying to do something about all of the problems as a young, angry person. resonating with that and finding camaraderie and solidarity in being upset together, and drawing an identity from it. And then eventually, as it matured, seeing that there were deep truths that resonated with the discipleship path that I came back to, and saw how they tied together. And I'm still trying to do that. And that led me to a lot of different projects. My family moved to the Pontiac, Michigan area after I graduated high school because of my dad's work, and shortly found the music scene there and started a project traveling and performing locally in the Detroit, Michigan area, and toured with that project for about 5 years. And that led me to a bunch of festivals that were a lot of other like-minded underground music groups were happening. And the picture that Ched just put up there was a group that I toured with the longest. It was a project called Salters. And that group was born out of a desire to, I spent a summer in Africa, and a lot of the fellows and ladies involved in that project had spent a lot of time listening to social justice concerns, and specifically trying to be influenced by refugee cultures, oppressed cultures, and nomadic cultures, especially if they were if that had happened to them because of America's involvement in disrupting their traditional way of life. And so combining that with a biblical understanding that that's where the faith tradition stories also sit with, that the main theme of it is this Exodus concept, we started thinking of ourselves as drawing on the Psalters was drawing on an idea of the collective body of music of the people of faith, but also specifically the worship leaders in the temple who were to lead everyone. And so much of the theme was remembering the Exodus, remembering that they were a people in bondage and that they had to come out of that and how to not become that again. And so as worship leaders wanting to connect worship back to justice in that vein, we also said our worship music, our original music, the hymns that we continue to sing in our worship times on Sunday or when we're leading in any setting, shouldn't be really influenced by a dominant pop culture aesthetic, but should be discipling to the music of the oppressed, the music of the refugee, the music of the indigenous, the music of the cultures that had gone through some kind of exodus. So what was the sound of Exodus? So everybody in the band had different leanings. Like I said before, my main discipline was listening to traditional West African Afro-diasporic stuff, not just in drumming traditions, but also in blues and gospel and reggae. And then other guys in the band had more emphasis on Middle Eastern cultures, Kurdish stuff. Scotty there in the front just got back from a CPT trip with Iraqi Kurdistan. And he had also spent some time before the first Gulf War there. And some of the guys were more into Native American stuff. Some of them were more into Gypsy and klezmer stuff. So it was a world fusion project, but all of the stuff we were trying to combine was, what is the sound of Exodus? If Jesus says that whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me, we took that as he's identifying that that's where he is. That's where the Spirit is always with the oppressed people. So what is that sound? So that was the impetus behind the creation of the project. And then we also wanted to be, at least in our small American way, trying to also live out and feel Exodus to a certain extent. So we bought an old school bus and figured out how to run it on vegetable oil and kind of continuously toured for 5 years with not a home base or somewhere to go back to. So if we weren't playing shows, we were camping somewhere or connecting to a community, but we were always on the road, trying to feel Exodus and be this and see what that would teach us, and how it would influence our music. And through that long of a touring time, we got to, like Tevyn was saying with her tours as well, we got to meet so many amazing communities and see their resistance work. We got to partner with a lot of people and share ideas, and it kind of built an underground awareness that something was happening and people were not feeling as alone and were drawn to these things. And then it birthed into more and more small events that became these little family reunions for the underground Christians who were connecting through this, that we look forward to and started becoming involved in meeting as well, and leading and participate in organizing. So some of those were the Common Ground Festival on St. Martin's Mountain, Papa Festival, and some of the other smaller ones like the winter gatherings. But we are always, Cornerstone Festival was a big one that Jesus People have been putting on. The community in Chicago have been hosting since the 70s. A lot of us had met at that festival playing in different projects. We met, Chad, I think for the first time we met you in Greenbelt in England.
Yeah,
so
that's
we
right.
And told you that we were making copies of your stuff and handing them out at our shows. And I think you said that's what you got for talking about anarchy. So we were we got to meet our heroes too through these tours, and you know, the theologians we were reading, who we felt were we were disseminating that information to our audience who might not have been having access to them. And so a lot of stuff spread. Gatherings happened where our mentors and teachers and theologians and elders in the movement started speaking into that community more and more. And I feel like so many great examples of that have developed and blossomed into where things are headed now. And that's how I met Tev too. She was touring her show, and we had heard about her at the same communities that Salters was touring. And then I ended up being the stage manager for Papa Festival, and booked her to come and perform at that festival.
Ah, yes, the fateful meeting, and that has birthed this incredible collaboration. So let's transition over to talking about the germination of this project that you're working together on now. And maybe, Tevyn, you can talk about the early ideas of this, and then we'll switch over to the slideshow that you want to share with us.
Let's see. The Carnival Project is something that I think lots of people have been dreaming about. And when our crew came together for the first launch of the carnival, we didn't all know each other, but there were some people who had heard about this happening, were longing for something like this to happen, and I think that is why we approached it with such commitment and love. So what the carnival is an effort to integrate faith, arts, and activism. Actually, I'm going to talk through what the carnival is, and Jay is going to talk more about the ideas behind the Carnival Project, some of the theology.
Don't you have something to put on in order to do this? I think there's
Yes.
some costuming involved.
Oh.
Yeah,
There's a cue.
It doesn't really make sense to not have a mask on.
The Carnival Project is an effort to show how art can transform, how play can educate, and how the imagination is utterly critical to us moving into another way of being. So masks are also very helpful with all of those things. The carnival, up until this point, has happened 3 times. We had a residency in Harrisonburg, Virginia for 10 days, and Charlottesville, Virginia for 10 days, and we curated a venue at the Wild Goose Festival. The carnival is an effort to integrate 3 creative strategies, and that is to be a traveling arts carnival, to be a village demonstration project, and to be a project for education and outreach and social engagement. So these are some of the first, the big picture of our venues. That one is Harrisonburg, Virginia. We roll into town and build a carnival world. We have a day to build it. This was the first time we had ever built the carnival, and this is the picture we took on the first night after we had gotten everything up. And this is our venue in Wild Goose. So it is a traveling arts carnival, which means we actually come together and journey together to these sites. At the Virginia residencies, we bicycled from our meetup point to the first location, had our residency, bicycled to the next location, and then bicycled all the way back to our meeting point. It was about 120 miles of bicycling. We were not experienced bicyclists, and we did not have an organizer who was able to sort of handle and chart out what this would mean for the group. So we came into this and had some challenges and grew tremendously by meeting those challenges and getting through them as a group. The picture up in the right-hand corner is of when we were looking at the map and realized that we had bicycled 10 miles in the wrong direction. And the picture in the bottom corner is where we had been bicycling for 30 some miles that day and then had one big mountain to climb before we got to our resting place. So we bicycle into our location, which the first 2 residencies was in a church lot. We unload and we begin building our carnival world. It includes a carnival big top and some sideshow tents that you can see back there, and the carnival midway. We believe art has the power to transform. So once we have built the world, we animate this world and invite people into direct experience with these ideas. In the midway, we have our sideshows. This is the man-eating plant sideshow tent. Very scary sideshow. We have games that are tools for educating. We have knocking down the corporate giant, where we talk about the David and Goliath story. We have Through the Eye of the Needle Frisbee toss, which is camels on frisbees. We have toss out fossil fuels. We have the GMO freak show. We also have the creation station, where people are constantly making art, getting their faces painted. They can build sock puppets. There's a lot of playfulness, and you're invited to follow your curiosity. There are roaming performers and musicians. We're inviting people to come in and play with us. We had a play station. Here's one of our puppeteers, had these beautiful puppets. We have stilt creatures, mythical creatures. We had the behemoth at Wild Goose. And after people have had a chance to play in the midway and engage with us, I should say that there was we were able to draw people into these games, engaging the children and also inviting all to get in touch with their inner child. Then we move into the production. So people come into the tent, sit down, and are there for a performance. This performance is, we think of it as ceremonial theater or a liturgical variety act show. We are focusing on environmental justice and the reading stories from our tradition through the lens of indigenous people groups and as a resistance movement. We have musicians, we have our band, and the band is being powered by a bicycle-powered sound system. And the productions follow the elemental themes. So we have an earth, an air, a water, and a fire show. These are separate shows. So we performed 4 separate shows in each of our residencies. And at Wild Goose, we had 3 of these shows. There's Jay and myself as Raven and Dove, and of course the fire show. More fire show. Here we are with the water show that we'll be sharing at the festival with Jay and myself as John the Baptist and Miriam. And each of the shows would sort of culminate in a communal, sacramental ritual together, connecting with each of the elements, and then it would just roll into a dance party. And these dance parties were actually hugely successful. We were able to get a wonderful mix of folks, all ages, sort of moving into this ecstatic release after moving through the Thanksgiving and the lament and the mystery of these shows. Another aspect of it being a traveling arts carnival is that we had visual artists with us who were painting all the time. And the paintings were sort of the greatest thing that we were able to leave and gift these communities with. This is what was left in our wake. The top left corner is our dear friend Dimitri and David Bravo, who's from Mexico and is a mural artist, does social muralism. Also our friend Paola on the upper right-hand corner, who will be at the festival and is a social muralist. This painting was the first collaboration among all of the visual artists with us, and we left that with the church that hosted us. Dimitri painted a mural at Eastern Mennonite University and had close to 100 students work with him on that, and that was one of the things we left behind. Here we painted a mini mural at the Catholic Worker House in Charlottesville, Virginia, and painted the mailboxes for them. Jessie Walls down in the lower corner, she painted a sign for our community place in Harrisonburg, Virginia, which was a wonderful gift for them. Here's the Dimitri painting at the Wild Goose Festival, and we also painted the chicken coop at the Catholic Worker House. So it's a traveling arts carnival. Another component of the art making is our parade and public witness. And this, of course, is where also the social outreach and activism connects. In Harrisonburg, we were able to connect with lots of local groups, environmental groups, service organizations, and we invited them to come together for a parade and to move into the downtown city hall, and we would hold the space. We would set up the sound system. We would make some noise. We would bring our bicycle contraptions. We would have songs ready and people ready there to celebrate. But we would give the mic to the different local groups and provide a space for them to hear from each other and to be celebrated. We talk about shining our creative light on the local resistance efforts. So this is really drawing heavily from the Word and World example. This is not a traveling arts carnival that just rolls into town and says, come and see what we do. We truly entered into the community, engaged on multiple levels, and were interested in building partnerships with the local resistance community. This is the parade that we did, just another example of parade. The parade that we did in at Wild Goose Festival, bringing some extra flair and fun to that time. So the education and outreach at the Wild Goose Festival, it was in the form of the panels and the talks that happened within our tent. These were panels and talks that we curated and drew together, hoping that the themes that our mentors and teachers would be presenting would help provide more of a theological ground for the productions. I do not have as many of the pictures to share. Let's see. Oh, here are our dear friends who came and shared at Wild Goose. This is Sarah Thompson from CPT. I love this picture because she is preparing for the fire show, and she's also working on her sermon that she's giving the next morning at the same time. And then our friend Jim Perkinson, who wrote a lot of the poetry for the theatrical productions that Jay and I created, and Laurel Dykstra, whose playfulness and sort of street theater background works beautifully also with her critique and theological bent. So when we were in Virginia, during the weekdays within our residency, we sent our group, our Carnival crew members out into the community and engaged on multiple levels. And I do not have so many pictures, but Jay led a drum workshop at the local school. We had a songwriting and storytelling workshop that happened at an intergenerational daycare. We worked at the community gardens. We did a mask making workshop at the Boys and Girls Club. We taught about a dozen classes at Eastern Mennonite University, led chapel, led worship. There were so many ways that we were going out into the community. Oh, we built a tree house. I do have a picture of that. Built a tree house at a local community center that is the New Community Project in Harrisonburg that is looking at being a fossil fuel-free CSA and does solidarity work with local refugee families. So we're going out, providing gifts, engaging, learning from these different groups, and inviting them back to be with us under the big top. Another aspect, one of the creative strategies that we're integrating here is that this is a communal lifestyle experiment. We are living together outside as a group, exploring a number of sustainable alternatives from how we cook. You see our rocket stoves there that work without using fossil fuels. They essentially use twigs. And you see our compost toilets in the distance and our solar shower. These are efforts to try on some alternatives, knowing that we can't turn a switch and somehow just become another culture, but that if we give ourselves to this experiment, that it will be what we call a holy game, that it will do some work on us and invite us to imagine how this could happen more in our ordinary lives. And it was a profound experience for all of us. It did. I think it was very transformative for all of us. And people came and visited us and were able to see this way of living. During the Wild Goose Festival, that was when we did a better job, I think, of leading people through tours and showing folks how the village operates. But it was something where we all had to be involved. We all had to work a little bit harder. It takes a lot more time and a lot more love to boil water in the morning for 20 people to have coffee when you're not using a propane tank. But that was the way of all being a part of this and serving each other. Really deepened our appreciation for each other and grew our bonds with each other. And there was also regular playfulness within the village. It was about living differently, and it was also about trying to inhabit another story, playing together, singing together, and yeah, incarnating another way. So this is we had a game where we had different dares that happened during the eating time, and down at the bottom, that's where we had 3 men braiding their beards together. So that is my I think that is the last slide. Oh, and we were just constantly making art also. Painting, teaching folks to juggle. Our puppet man was constantly fashioning new puppets with the materials that he found around the carnival. And that's our story of what has happened so far.
Now, Tevyn, Lyndon Harris has typed in a question wondering whether you will be back at the Wild Goose Festival this summer.
I think the carnival as a whole will not be there in the way that we were this past summer. I think some of us individually will be there. It is happening the week before the Word and World School, and we've decided to focus on being at Word and World because we see it as a really wonderful opportunity to sort of deepen in our discipleship as a community. And we also have some more work to do to make it sustainable to operate at the level that we did last year at Wild Goose. So they would like to have us back, and we would like to go back. And it could happen in the way that it did before again, but it won't be, not this summer.
All right. And Jay, you're going to weigh in on this?
Sure, yeah. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, the theology behind why we chose to do Carnival. So, like, I hope everyone can still take me seriously. uh, yeah, and so a lot of people, I'm sure, are familiar with the Carnival, and as a social phenomenon throughout history, not specifically with our carnival, but what we're drawing on there. We've gone and talked about the ideas behind these events with a few people, and a lot of funny stuff comes up nowadays when I usually start talks saying, like, when you hear the word carnival, what do you think? And a lot of people come back with, like, county fairs or freak shows, sideshows, or they think about Lent if they grew up in those traditions that celebrate Lent, and then all that stuff is true and connected. So I feel like there is a social understanding of it in our culture that still has remnants of an understanding of what the event means, but it also has some real deep stuff that a lot of us aren't aware of anymore that we'd hope to draw on and bring back. So, the term carnival coming from the Latin saying goodbye to meat or farewell to flesh, carnival meaning the last feast day before Lent would begin. That would be Fat Tuesday or Mardi Gras, and it has the connections to that. But it also has an older connection just to the medieval Feast of the Fools that was usually around the New Year. And the Carnivalesque even became a term because of those festivals, in both in literary modes and in describing different arts or political happenings, because it became a synonym for a mode that was always intending to subvert and liberate the assumptions of the dominant atmosphere through humor and through chaos. Bakhtin writes a lot about that, and a lot of that has been influential to us, but it was a time and a season where those social hierarchies of everyday life, all the solemn and pieties and the etiquettes, as well as all the ready-made truths that the dominant culture just either expected everyone to accept or brutally enforced. It was a time where those were allowed to be profaned, and they were allowed to be overturned, usually by the normally suppressed voices and energies. And so it was that special time where the fools were the wise ones. The kings had to be the beggars. It was that liminal space where things that were seemingly opposites became mingled. Fact and fantasy, heaven and hell, male and female. All the dualities that reinforced the social hierarchies, reinforced the religious thinkings that were usually connected to this oppression were destroyed. If just on that day they were destroyed. And it was not allowed, and it was intended to be the opposite. So it was an event that created a window to see what another reality might look like. And we feel like that needs to happen again, that they're having this kind of space that can become a site of that resistance to authority and the place where cultural and potentially even political change can begin to be dreamt about, if not enacted. And we see that it's also an interesting thing on how much it affects different cultures. So when I reference the Catholic Lenten tradition or the medieval Feast of Fools, very much a European thing. But then when you see it, the biggest carnival culture in the world right now is in Brazil. And you see a lot in the Caribbean and in South America, and the cultures that were forcefully brought and from Africa to the Caribbean and to South America especially saw within this time a place where their subversion could keep their faith, their traditional faiths alive, even if it was under the guise of Catholicism, but they were also allowed to speak out against their oppressors during that time. A lot of the floats and the crews were all themed to be making a political statement. They were allowed to mock the king and the slave masters in public and not be put in jail or beaten on that day. And so it was, again, this window that really held, whoa, what if the world was like that? And then whole societies got started up around it. I'm a student of samba, and I studied Brazilian percussion. And I've learned that the escolas de sambas, the schools that got started around Carnival, ended up becoming these little centers of communal resistance that on the surface of it were just seen as, oh, that's an organization who's getting ready for Carnival. So like they hang out there, they discuss their theme, they practice their music, and they build their float. So when Carnival comes, they have, their presentation on that day. But then they end up meeting all year round, talking about the theme that they want to present for this event, putting together their art that's going to express their resistance against how it is, and they end up being able to just spend time together being honest about what they're struggling. And so the event of this window of an opportunity to bust it all open and create a window into a new way actually became a cultural and political space. And so we feel like that's needed again as we look at some of the tactics that we've tried, like Tev was talking about earlier, the different levels of where she's gone through in the faith community, in the arts community, in the activist community. And we feel like, we're always trying to reinvent different tactics of resistance. That's like a central preoccupation for the movement, right? How do we make rebellion enjoyable? How do we make it effective? How do we make it irresistible? All these different questions that activists and artists and faith people are trying to. How do we sustain this? How do we make it be? How do we grow it? How do we create the world that we want to create? And so a lot of the times, a lot of the traditional demonstrations that I've been a part of and that Tevyn's been a part of, the protests, as important as they are, sometimes become tedious. They become these ritual marches from point A to point B with permits and police escorts and staged acts of civil disobedience, where, as crucial as that is in certain situations, also can become feeling futile and boring to a certain extent, as serious and important it is. And when there is this other form of rebellion that also embodies the movement's principles of diversity, of creativity, of decentralization, of direct action, you can find that in that ancient cultural form of the carnival. So we kind of wanted to draw on that and see what kind of space could be created in that, exposing the power structures, illuminating those processes that are kind of stay hidden, that maintain hierarchies, and look at it from a new angle where there is this sense of unpredictability and spontaneity, where you can put on a mask and become an archetype and listen to that archetype, or listen to an ancient character who is a symbol of freedom. You can change genders, you can change power dynamics, you can hear things from a new space. It subverts all the stereotypes, and it asks us to dare our imaginations to expand their limits, to turn the world upside down, even if that only is for a moment or for a day or for a season. We hope that events like this can break it open to that new reality. And we live in a world that's already on its head in a lot of ways. There's a writer called Eduardo Galeano says that, I'm just going to read a little bit of a quote where he says, it's a desolate, desouled world that practices the superstitious worship of machines and the idolatry of arms. An upside-down world with its left on its right, its belly button on its backside, and its head where its feet should be. In this upside-down world, children work, development impoverishes, the poor have to pay the rich, people are bombed in order to be liberated, free speech is paid for, cars are in the streets where people should be public servants don't serve, free trade is a monopoly, and the more you have, the more you get, and a handful of the global population consumes the majority of the resources. So we have to ask ourselves, if the world is upside down the way it is, wouldn't we have to turn it over to get it to stand upright? And so again, that carnivalesque, drawing on that carnivalesque aspects of that, and then seeing residents of that humor and that trickery in the tradition and the text itself. When we start, most of our shows are looking at rereading biblical stories with an emphasis on seeing how creation was speaking, seeing how the divine was speaking through either the prophet's relationship with creation or specifically creation speaking itself. So we see the prophets as these kind of performance artists in a lot of ways, and we see them getting their visions through interaction with the wilderness and the Spirit speaking through the elements, the Spirit speaking through the situation, and telling these crazy people who are listening to go into the dominant culture and do some weird stuff like lay on your side for 40 days or walk around naked and tell them that the burning plant in the desert told you to let everybody go free. It's got an aspect of theatricality in it, yeah, and it's got an aspect of deep indigenous wisdom too, and we're trying to see how those relate. The more I studied about, a lot of indigenous cultures have a tradition of sacred clowning, and trying to tie all these in and having them influence both our art and our work and our activism, and then pull that out to the community to create that liminal space where a window is opened up and an alternative can be glimpsed and hopefully walked into.
The gospel reading last Sunday, in the second Sunday of Epiphany, was John's version of the call to disciples, which centers around the phrase, "Come and see." That really strikes me as a great invitation regarding the Carnival, because it's very difficult to grasp the magnificence of this alternative universe that you construct if you're not there. You kind of have to see it to believe it, and we used to say that in the early days about the Word and World schools, the incredible diversity and different layers and community coming together. It was something that you would come away from and you weren't quite sure how to describe it to your friends and family. The Carnival is sort of that on steroids. It's just such a magnificent, mystical, pedagogic, artistic, playful, performative space. I'm really delighted that I got a chance to be immersed for a few days at the Wild Goose Festival last summer, and came away even more of a believer having seen it in action. And so I want to say to the folks on this webinar, you need to figure out how to connect with the Carnival. I want to ask you a question in that vein. You have gone to great lengths drawing on each of your faith traditions and each of your artistic pilgrimages to make the Carnival an expression of faith, an expression of theological literacy, of environmental literacy. And there's a lot of parallels between how people talk about liturgy and worship when it's done right, as creating a liminal space, opening up an axis mundi between heaven and earth. Again, the gospel reading last Sunday was about Jesus alluding to the story of Jacob's dream in the desert and the angels ascending and descending. That's what worship and liturgy does when it is doing its work. That's also what the carnival does when it's doing its work. Do you want to reflect a little bit on how you all see the synergy or the dialectic between liturgy worship and carnival performance?
I'll share a little bit, and then you can add on. When we were preparing the theatrical productions, which are the sort of featured artistic element of the carnival, we were looking at the arc of different rituals. We looked at Mass. We looked at Protestant liturgy or liturgical worship. We looked at Joanna Macy's the work that reconnects. We looked at creation spirituality and Native American and various Native American rituals, and saw that in each there is this space of moving through a time of thanksgiving, of relishing the gift of life, the gift of creation, and going into grief and lament. The advantage of having various art forms integrated is that these are embodied. We invite people to feel this in a very visceral way, and they are embodied, lived expressions of grief and thanksgiving. And then there is this time of proclaiming the mystery, the teaching time, which have been Jay and myself, our theatrical productions, and then into a sacramental space. And I think that as we're, one of the biggest focuses, I feel like we have not emphasized this enough, but Ched, you mentioned this, a big focus is that we believe that in order to shift away from readings of Scripture that reinforce systems of domination and that have moved in step with the corporate global system that is that relates to the earth as resources, as natural resources, to move away from that interpretation and to really step into what the Scripture has to say as an coming out of a wilderness tradition, and living into right relationship with the earth, that there is a lot more grief work that we have to do. And there is a transformation that is not just hearing ideas and relating to critique, but is really getting in there with our bodies, feeling pain and feeling hope. And then it becomes this cathartic or ecstatic communal experience to have gone through that experience and then to dance.
Yeah. I'm in agreement with all that, and there were definitely, like Tev was saying, to just continue to answer your question, the desire to have it be almost thought of as liturgical was definitely in the formation of the way we planned the shows and the way we kind of structured the way people engage with the space itself. So we have, the main three sections of our space. When people come, we're camping in a public place, so there's a village that's lived. But when the shows are opened, there's the threshold, and then there's the midway, and then there's the big top. And so moving even the people through the space and liturgical constructs of the threshold having, you have left one reality and you're crossing into a different way. And the midway is this big open space where all the games and the roving musicians and performers are, and it's more interactive, and it's called the midway because it's midway between the threshold and the big top. But the midway is the most liminal space because it's one of my favorite things that happened was what happened with the characters that Laurel and Jim became during the midway at the Wild Goose. Laurel became, I think her name was, it was something like Bothandor, either or something, Bothand either or something. And she had a black and white mask, half black, half white, with like a cape full of skunk furs that were all black and white. And she would just ask people questions that didn't have an answer, or if people asked her a question, she would engage in dialogue that made them have to think about something in a different way, and then she would answer with an impossible, double question. And Jim ended up being the poetic cuckoo who lived in our broken clock tower. So the centerpiece of our midway village is this clock tower with smashed clocks all over it, and signs on it that kind of said things like, "Do you have time, or does time have you?" Or Tolstoy's quote that said, "In the name of God, cease what you're doing and look around you." And just these aspects that make us think about time and space differently, that made us think about Sabbath time and like actual rest and like stopping, that made us think about what is controlling our life and when do we, and like there is this machine with these numbers on it that basically guide and dictate what we do. And so we had a ritual ceremony where we counted down and kind of pretended to die and smashed the clock, and then came back up in an awareness of who was there presently, and we all just looked in each other's eyes deeper and said, "You are here, I am here, we are here." And that was like our peace be with you. And it was a liturgical, intentional thing to have a fun, crazy way of breaking the symbols of the world we usually inhabit, opening an awareness to a different reality again, and then but drawing on those liturgical concepts. And then the show's the same way that Tevyn was describing, moving through celebration and grief and lament and thanksgiving and sacramental. We think of it as ceremonial theater. We hope that it becomes worship, and that criticism can be a part of worship. Justice issues should be a part of worship. And then I think about ritual in general and how it has held together the communities, the indigenous communities and the tribal communities that I so much admire and respect and am trying to learn from, both in sustainability ways with their relationships with the land and with their relationships with each other, and in their spiritualities that seem closer to living out the call of the gospel than most of the Christianity that I grew up with. And so looking at those ritual forms and seeing in general what the point of ritual is to kind of make the three dances find out where they meet: the dance of the individual, the dance of the community, and the dance of all of creation, and how we all say this is how it works together. This is who we are. This is where we are. This is what we're about. That's the general sense of what ritual and ceremony is for, and then to be applying it specifically through those archetypal themes that we're emphasizing each night, whether it would be a focus on water, and those stories of the faith heroes who are connected to water, the voices from the other oppressed communities and their perspectives on what's happening to water. But yes, very much so hoping that all of that is liturgical, ceremonial, ritual, mystical, liminal, and hopefully transformative and worshipful.
Yeah. And I think that that's important to emphasize, because in popular culture, insofar as North Americans think about carnival or think about circus, they think of entertainment. And this project of yours is so intentional, so deeply liturgical, so profoundly engaged in the issues of the day, that in many ways I think it is helping to rehabilitate the true meaning of Carnival, Jay, as you've described it. I'm so glad that, Tevyn, that you showed all those pictures, because it gives a little bit of a sense of the community that's created and all there is going on. I want to invite our participants. This is a time when you can chat in questions, and I want to encourage you to do that. We've already got a couple on the board. Lyndon Harris has asked whether something could be done with the theme of forgiveness in future carnivals. And I think he's also looking for the source of that Edward Galeano quote, Jay, that you were offering. Tevyn, any thoughts on something around forgiveness? I know that restorative justice really is one of the strands that you all take seriously in animating this work. Any response to Lyndon's question?
Yeah. Two thoughts. One, within our community, it has been important that we take seriously the work of doing reconciliation and managing our conflict in as healthy a way as possible, and had mediators and folks within our community prepared to take on that work. And we did a actually really remarkable job within the life of the village in Virginia, among people who did not all know each other, who were kind of in carrying very labor-intensive work for a month. Then the other thing that I would say, I would encourage folks to check out on the Radical Discipleship blog. Sarah Thompson put up something about her reflections on the carnival experience, and saw the ways in which the carnival is like a white recovery project. We so far with the Wild Goose and with Virginia, we're primarily connecting with an audience that was majority white, and are looking at how we are have to be with our histories of the legacies that inheritance brings, but also carry that hope of what we may recover if we look at that pain and also live into alternatives and give our imaginations to other ways. So I think that I think that it can be very healing in looking at how do we carry our how do we relate to the history of this faith tradition? How do we relate to our social and economic privilege? And how do we imagine and carry the hope of really being transformed and being all liberated into more restorative practices. Those are the
Thanks.
first things that come to mind.
Yeah, good.
Can I add a little thing to that too about the forgiveness? One, I wanted to just add that I'd be totally interested in thinking about how it could work within the carnival. But the other aspect, of course, it's a powerful thing that we all need to address. But the other aspect is how can we do it in a carnivalesque way? Like how does it contribute to that, the way of engaging with it? And so I'd love to hear ideas that you'd have. We're always looking for more collaborators, and we're always looking for host organizations who wants this to come to their community. And we are real leaning towards learning how to create, and the form of the carnival changes depending on who the host community is, who is going to be coming to the events, who's going to be presenting the events, and the specific themes that where we can integrate and include the local people and the people that the project is going to be for. And so we're thinking a lot about that for our participation with the Word and World School in Detroit right now, and how to open it up to have more local presenters be involved. So please, email us and give us your suggestions for that. It's reminding me of a piece in the book Blue Like Jazz, where I think it was that book, the author put a confessional booth just like in the middle of a school, a college campus, and his intent was to have people come in and he was going to confess the sins of the church to them. And it ended up backfiring on him, and people just wanted to come in and say that and tell their sins. And most of them ended up being consumer sins. But something like that, like a carnivalesque aspect to creating a space where transformation like that could happen. We'd be real excited about adding more to the midway or other ideas for that.
I want to draw participants' attention to the chat box where Tim Nafziger has given several links to helpful pieces on Word and World, a little bit more on Feast of Fools, on some of the essays on the Word and World site, making some of these same connections with the circus tradition, and also with the piece that Tevyn mentioned by Sarah Thompson on the Radical Discipleship blog. I also want to say to participants that you all now will have the link to the recorded version of this webinar, which gives a nice overview of the Carnival. And it's something you can use with your friends. This is one of the ways to spread the gospel of the Carnival and to generate interest in it. This is really, Tevyn and Jay, this experiment is less than 3 years old, I think, as this specific collaboration, and really just trying to find your feet, make it sustainable. You guys have really stretched out incredibly far as individuals and as a community trying to make this thing happen. And it's really up to us in the community of faith and practice to help spread the gospel of the Carnival de Resistance. And of course, the best way to do that is to come and see. So this year, 2015, I think the two major iterations of pieces of the Carnival will be at our Festival of Radical Discipleship next month here in the Ventura River watershed in mid-February, and then at the Word and World School in Detroit in mid-late July. Are there other places where
there are some possibilities being negotiated, but no firmed up engagements at this time
for this year?
Yeah. We are looking into the future. We are preparing to do another full launch of the Carnival in 2016. which would be, again, a month-long event where we would have a 10-day residency in one town or city, in building a carnival world in a church lot or in a lot with a host organization, and then at a second residency within bikeable distance is the it's sort of a tricky thing to line up just right. But that those locations are not yet established, and so we will be spending this spring exploring where those locations might be.
Ellen Jenkins in Atlanta is going back and forth a little bit with Lyndon about wondering who in the activist community are integrating in some of these more playful aspects. And Reverend Billy and the Stop Shopping Gospel Choir is certainly one of them. School of the Americas over the past number of years have certainly experimented with puppetry and a little bit more playfulness, as well as the more solemn processions with crosses with the names of victims on them. I think Simple Way in the past has done sort of street theater stuff around the Buy Nothing Day as a parody of Black Friday. Are there other things that come to mind that you all have come across in this vein?
Yeah, very much so. The Bread and Puppet Theater out of Vermont, that we got to go visit them on our honeymoon. That was one of our stops. But they've been doing stuff since the '60s. They used to be in Harlem, huge, giant puppets and parades. Now they have a base in Vermont, and they do a lot of social justice theater. There was the big Carnival Against Capital in Quebec City. That most of the actions I know about them was in 2001. They have an awesome story of this huge catapult that they built that launched teddy bears into riot cops. There in Philly, I know that there's the Revolutionary Anarchist Clown Block, and they had come to protest with unicycles and big squeaky mallets and huge shoes, and they usually like confuse the cops by attacking each other. Lots of there's the Carnival of the Oppressed that works off of some of the Theater of the Oppressed stuff that Augusto Boal does, but makes it more of a public performance art aspect. A lot of that stuff has happened in Nigeria, using puppets and songs and circus acts to illustrate, and of course, I think to a certain extent, saying Carnival de Resistance is almost redundant, except in our culture it's not remembered because Carnival meant that it was going to be turning it upside down, that it was the way things are into the dominant culture. So in Mardi Gras in New Orleans and in Rio, Carnival has gotten commercialized and become more of a dominant culture drunken party in certain places, but the roots are still there, and the communities of oppression are still utilizing and think of it that way, as a way to speak their voice, as a way to continue to.
A really excellent site to go check out is creativeresistance.org, and that is they have a huge collection of performance, and visual art, and animation and music that is all resistance focused. Thank you, Tim.
Yes, Alan, this is being recorded, and in a few days you all will get the link to the recording, the edited recording, and you're welcome to use that really as a webinar brochure for this project, and it's a great way to hear the deep and beautiful thoughts of these two animators. Jan Tevyn, it's just been such a privilege to spend an hour and a half with you talking about your lives and your work. Anything you want to say by way of invitation or conclusion as we begin to wind down?
I guess I just wanted to say a big thank you to a lot of the people on this panel that I'm looking at the names and knowing that they've been constant supporters, either in their time and their gifts, financial contributions, or just spiritual encouragement, showing up to the events. Of course, Chad and BCM always been speaking into this project and mentoring it from its inception, both of us personally and as a project. So we're really grateful, and we're also excited about where it could be next, and we have a lot of open question marks. And so if you have excitement about where that can be hosted, we want to know where we should come to and how to partner with who.
Well, I want to say Warren Cooper, Tina Mata, Steve Clemens, Solveig and the PDX crew, Sarah and Nathan, Gordon Carter, you all are going to be blown away by these folks and by just the little piece of it that you'll see next month at the Institute. I'm so excited to have you all meet each other and learn, see a little demonstration project of the Carnival. It's not too late for some of you to
Come on, Alan.
sign up. Alan Jenkins, not late for you all to get out to the Institute. And I also really want to emphasize the Detroit as well. I think it will be a showing of the Carnival. I want to remind all of you that it isn't too late. We have till February 1st. That's our final deadline for registrations for the Festival of Radical Discipleship. We've got over 125 people registered now, so it's going to be our biggest event ever, and so delighted that Tevyn and Jay are going to be among featured performers. Here are some of the other folks are going to be keynoters. Last month you heard Myra and Mary Ramerman from Spiritus Christi moving around clockwise. Kim from the Underground Seminary in Minneapolis is coming. Ndume Oliashani from the Children's Defense Fund. Art Cribbs, who works with Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice, California. Jennifer Henry, Executive Kairos Canada. And our own Aaron Smith and Reina Ortega talking about the Abundant Farm Project. We're going to be just some of the people doing the plenaries. We've got artists. We've got Swanson, world-class lithographist, will be bringing his artwork. Robert Tubols of the Lakota Nation and the Diocese of Minnesota Episcopal Native Ministries is going to be here as both an artist and a liturgist. Ted Litton Hatton is going to do some of his amazing in situ ephemeral art, which he also did at Wild Goose last summer. Of course, Dmitry Kadyev will be back to paint more murals. Whole bunch of workshops. We're going to have at least 24 workshops over the days of the festival. Tenzi Hernandez, Tim Nafziger, Faustino Cruz, Shadi Hakim, Hyun Her, Lydia Wally Kellerman, Vicky Machado, Susan Taylor, Vicky Tamush, there's Jörg Rieger, theologian from Texas, Eric Brown, Dee Dee Rischer, Chris Gratowski, all folks who are going to be talking about of the radical discipleship movement. And we're going to have folks talking about their recent publications. Jim Perkinson's going to talk about his book on Zionism. Romal Toon talking about his book God's Graffiti. Mark, his book on anarchism. Jeff Broughton, the brand new book out on restorative justice is just amazing. Gordon Oyer is going to be talking about his book on the Merton Retreat of 1964. Alexia Salvatierra, her book on faith community organizing. So as you can see, it's going to be a 3 and a festival all at once. Most importantly, our musicians are going to join us. On the right, the great Warren Cooper is coming from Philadelphia. Scott Klassen is not going to bring his, but hopefully we'll bring his mandolin, music. Tim Zender, longtime collaborator and good friend of Tina Mata, with us. The venerable Charlie, one of our great folk singers and labor musicians, is going to be, and the young and upcoming Beth Martin, freshly back from Korea, is going to be with us. So artists, musicians, preachers, teachers, carnivalistas. I think we're going to have what of the joining us for the institute.
Yep.
It's going to be a great time. So we can hardly wait for that coming in just a month. Thank you everybody for joining us. And Tevyn, can I invite you to maybe give us a little benediction of however you feel so moved in gratitude for this time to talk with you and hear about your vision. Just lead us home, sister.
Can I do it in song? Will you join me? May the beauty you love be what you do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. Blessings to everyone.
Thank you, everybody. As is our usual practice, we will let the chat line run. If you want to express your thanks to Jay and Tevyn, we say thank you to you all. Thanks to Chris White in the next room, who's, as usual, working the magic, getting this thing up and running. He's also the registrar wrangling all these people coming next month. We're really appreciative, Chris, of your work. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in tonight, and we'll see you next month, one way or another.